Defense experts, UFO enthusiasts, all scratching their head in the wake of an appearance of a mysterious aircraft over the West Coast last month. The Air Force, the FAA, individual pilots all agree that an unknown aircraft of some kind was traveling north above Oregon. What was the plane? Why was it there? And why can't we know for certain? Because nobody does at this point. Tyler Rogaway is editor of The War Zone. It's a defense news site, and he joins us tonight. Tyler, this is a pretty well-traveled air lane from what I can tell. Why in 2017 don't we know what this was?
You know, and that's the crazy thing about this is one of those rare deals where with all the corroboration, including the FAA and NORAD and pilots, we still have no idea what this aircraft was. Now, it could very well be, Tucker, that the FAA and the DOD are looking into this and they're going to potentially figure out what this was, or they might already know. But we just don't know at this time. And it definitely is a quality assurance issue for the FAA.
Quality assurance issue, yeah, and there's some other concerns about it too. So what did it look like, did they say?
Well, all we know, it was a white aircraft. It had the same type of performance as a jet. It was flying at between 35,000 and 40,000 feet, where probably you fly all the time when you travel.
Commercial airliner, yeah.
And yeah, and so it was just, it looked like, but nobody could make out the type. So that does leave it a little bit questionable, as if it was an airliner or potentially a military aircraft.
But an airliner would, of course, be identified. It would have a transponder on, right?
Right. This did not have any communications, no transponder, so no identification or altitude for Seattle Center to see, and it was not really trackable on radar. They did not have a consistent primary return. So this had all three going for it. It basically wasn't there, aside from the pilots that literally were asked by Seattle Center to look outside and say, hey, is it there? And all of them did see it. And it was this went on for multiple, 10, 15 minutes, and possibly longer. We just don't have the radio tapes for that other section of Seattle Center, the area that they control.
Well, that's just absolutely bizarre and kind of threatening. I mean, you'd think that our air traffic control would have a handle on what's in a commercial airlane, no?
Yeah, I mean, they were really trying to figure out what was going on. They launched F-15s after this, Tucker, and those jets at that base have the most powerful air-to-air radar in the world, and other upgrades, and they couldn't find it. Even NORAD told me, they said they went up and they looked around, and it wasn't there.
So what are the options? I mean, if the F-15s couldn't find it, then what could it be?
Right, and that's really what a lot of people are asking, of course. And some people say maybe it was a smuggler, somebody that bought a Lear for very cheap that was not flyable and just flew it for some reason, maybe up to Canada. That's very improbable. Another one is maybe a military aircraft that's straight off the range, like an unmanned system. The DoD is working heavily in the high end of unmanned aircraft space that they don't talk about. And you remember in 2011 when an RQ-170 Sentinel stealth drone, surveillance drone, fell into the hands of Iran. That aircraft strayed from its course and actually fell, like I say, into the enemy's hands. So the idea that it could potentially fly into Oregon off one of the ranges in northern Nevada isn't totally out of the question.
Right, and there are other explanations too, which we'll leave to the imagination of our viewers. Tyler, thank you very much for that.
It was great being here. Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you. Military pilots keep encountering aircraft that do things they can't explain, that seem to defy the basic laws of physics. This is happening a lot. It's happened for many years. The Pentagon knows, but they're not interested in investigating it. Why is that? We're going to talk to someone who was at the center of this story at the Pentagon next. Over and over and over again, U.S. military pilots have cited, sometimes at very close range, aircraft whose appearance and behavior they cannot explain, that science itself, the laws of physics, cannot explain. Now, it almost doesn't matter what this is. It doesn't have to be extraterrestrial to be a real concern to U.S. national security, and some are concerned. But as an organization, the Pentagon doesn't seem to be, and doesn't seem to be interested in investigating. Why not, is the question. Christopher Mellon is a National Security Affairs Advisor for the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Mellon, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Tucker. Thank you.
So I want to make sure I'm not overstating that. Military pilots have seen at relatively close range objects, aircraft apparently doing things that aircraft we didn't think were able to do, and they've taken video of that. Is that true?
That's true, although that's only part of the evidence. what's so compelling about the evidence is we have our finest military personnel and our most sophisticated sensors all corroborating the information independently on multiple platforms. So some of these platforms are the same platforms we would use to defend the United States from a ballistic missile attack from, say, North Korea. If those systems are malfunctioning in some way, finding that out alone would be a huge benefit. I don't think that's the case. There's no evidence of that. Let me tell you a brief story that may add some color and make this a little bit more palpable. After my op-ed appeared with the video, I got a call from an individual retired from the Defense Department and who had worked on these issues, and I asked him, I said, do you have any context for that video? Do you have any details? He told me that was one of 2 videos that came into the Pentagon from the commander of a carrier battle group. And these are his words. He described it as a plea for help, end quote.
That's terrifying. So, I mean, these are aircraft unidentified that are operating in very close proximity to the U.S. military, to ships and planes. We can assume it's not American, or they wouldn't be that close. Can we assume that it's aircraft from a foreign country? I mean, do we have a working theory on this? What does the Pentagon think about this?
We don't have a working theory, and the most fundamental problem, and it's a self-inflicted problem, and frankly a fairly easy problem to correct, and one of the reasons I wanted to write the article is because we have on the one hand something of immense, almost incalculable strategic importance, something that raises fundamental questions about the viability of our air defenses, about our aircraft. Many of these incidents have occurred in recent years within minutes of flying distance of the National Capital Region. So we have a very real and compelling body of evidence. On the other hand, we know that many of the problems can be easily solved if someone would just step forward. So what I'm talking about here is to provide an analogy that people may be able to relate to more readily than the complex DoD bureaucracy. The bombings recently in Austin, Texas, imagine if every time one of these bombs went off, you had a different police department responding, and none of these people were talking to each other, and nobody was in charge, right? Those bombings would probably still be going on. That's what's happening today. The different services, departments, agencies, the FBI,
of course,
people are gaining information, they're not sharing it, which is very reminiscent, unfortunately, of what happened before 9/11.
So give us, in the 50 seconds we have left, give us a sense of the scale here. You say these things are happening over the past 20 years. How many, roughly, would you say, credible sightings there have been by the U.S. military?
Yeah, it's hard to say over the last 20 years, and there's a difference. And one of the differences is that we're deploying much more capable sensors that provide a higher degree of fidelity. So whereas 15 years ago, we might get pilot reports saying, I saw a bright light out there. Now we're getting reports from an Aegis-class cruiser that says this thing came down from 80,000 feet, descended to 20,000 feet, dropped to 50 feet and hovered, then maneuvered towards the carrier, and then pilots are independently seeing it and confirming it and filming it. So it's a very different...
We're out of time. I hope this tape goes everywhere. Thank you for your bravery. Good to see you. We'll be right back.